Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you. Thanks for joining me here this morning for Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And I'm reviewing and refuting the 23 points presented by Dr. David Hester in my former public debate with him July 14th and 15th here at Ardmore, Oklahoma at our Preterist Pilgrim Weekend. That's 2016, of course. And one of the arguments that Dr. Hester offered was on the Lord's Supper. He gave some quotes from me, ridiculing me. Really, that's all his argument was. There was no exegesis of any text. He did appeal, of course, to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 26, where Paul said, "As often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do show forth the Lord's death until he comes." Now, Dr. Hester seemed to believe that this was a definitive argument against covenant eschatology. So I'm offering a few additional thoughts just on the supper to demonstrate that Dr. Hester has given, obviously, very, very little thought to the Lord's Supper in regard to eschatology. He has given little thought to proper hermeneutic, as we pointed out yesterday. The question that I posed yesterday was, Dr. Hester believes the Lord did come in AD 70. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 was written before the Lord's coming. Paul is writing in the context of that imminent event, as chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians 7 points out, when Paul says, "I think it good for the present distress that you would be as I am." He said, "The days have been shortened." He said, "The fashion of this world is," present active indicative, "passing away." Very obviously, Paul was anticipating an imminent, consummative event. So when we come to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, how would Dr. Hester delineate between the coming of the Lord of 1 Corinthians 11 and the coming of the Lord, the time of the end, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7? How does he know that 1 Corinthians chapter 11 is not dealing with the AD 70 parousia of the Lord, since Paul said, using the personal pronoun you 12 times, you, which is very clearly addressing the Corinthian church. You do take the Lord, show forth the Lord's death until he comes. Dr. David Hester never even addressed, never even suggested that he was aware of these issues, which just simply reveals that he did not understand the issues involved in covenant eschatology. Now, I want to share with you what is to me some of the most fascinating and significant and powerful corollaries between the Lord's Supper, the kingdom, and the parousia that obviously Dr. Hester has not thought about, has not developed. Because had he done so, he would not have made the argument that he did. From Luke chapter 22, verse 14 and following, we know that Jesus was eating the Passover. Now, this raises some very, very serious issues that I'm not going to develop here. But Jesus was in the midst of the Passover when he took the bread and said, "This is my body." He was showing the fulfillment of the typology of the Passover. He is, Paul would say in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 5, Christ is our Passover. So there is, in some sense, a direct correlation, typologically speaking, between Passover and what we call the supper. I'm not going to go into all of the questions that it raises, but I want you to notice, in Exodus 12 through 14, pardon me, Israel took of the supper the night that it was instituted, that is the Passover supper. The church took of the supper in commemoration of it being instituted the night it was instituted. All right? So here is Jesus on the night of the institution of what we call the supper, and they took of it that night. Passover, partaken the night it was instituted. Lord's Supper, the night it was instituted. I want you to notice that in Exodus 12 through 14, the Lord said they were to take the supper, and they took the supper in memorial of what had not yet occurred. Well, wait a minute. How do you take something as a memorial of what had not yet occurred? Well, it's kind of, it's a prolepsis. It was so certain to occur that they would take the supper as a memorial. Well, guess what? In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul is setting forth what they were doing in anticipation of the coming of the Lord, in celebration of the deliverance that had not yet taken place. I will verify that in just a moment. So, institute or take it on the night of institution as a memorial of that which had not yet taken place. Not only that, point number 3, Israel took the supper for the 40-year wilderness wandering according to Numbers chapter 9. Well, guess what? In the first century, the church was on the second Exodus, according to Hebrews chapter 3, for 40 years. And they took the supper during that 40-year, quote, wilderness wandering. And then, according to Joshua chapter 5, 10 and following, Israel took the supper after they entered the land. The day they entered the land, they took the Passover. Wow, this is incredible. Notice, pardon me. Notice that in Luke chapter 22, Jesus said, as he told them to participate in what he was doing, I will not henceforth eat of this until it is fulfilled in the kingdom. Israel took the supper when they entered the land. The church would take the supper when they entered the kingdom, i.e., the promised land. Now, that raises an interesting point, does it not? If Israel did not take the supper, I should say, if Israel took the supper when they entered the land, then should that not indicate that with the full arrival of the kingdom, and by the way, in Luke 21, 31 and 32, the kingdom came at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Now, it was born on Pentecost, but it came in full glory in AD 70. Pardon me. Now, watch this. This is what gives Dr. David Hester's position a fatal blow. The Passover was a remembrance and a memorial of deliverance. And people say, well, it was a memorial of deliverance from bondage. Well, that's right, but that's not all. The Passover was the memorial of deliverance from death. So why is that destructive to Dr. David Hester's position? Well, Dr. David Hester says the deliverance from death is not until the coming of the Lord, when, according to his position, the supper is ceased. It ceases to be observed. After all, he claims that Paul was saying that you take the supper until the coming of the Lord. But the coming of the Lord is the resurrection, i.e. the deliverance of death. So, according to David Hester's position, the Lord's Supper, as a memorial of deliverance from death, will cease to be observed at the very moment that the church is delivered from death. How then How then is it a genuine memorial as the Passover became for Israel as a genuine memorial of not only deliverance from bondage, but deliverance from death, and it became that when they entered into the promised land? Dr. David Hester would say, oh, well, the church is taking the supper as a memorial of what? Well, I don't have time to get into that, but Dr. David Hester doesn't believe we've been fully delivered yet, as I proved in the debate. So, he says we take of it in anticipation. Anticipation of what? The Lord's coming, the Lord's resurrection. Oh, but wait. The supper will never become a memorial of the deliverance from death like Passover had become, because according to Dr. David Hester, at the very moment of deliverance from death, the Lord's Supper ceases to be observed. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a major, major problem for Dr. David Hester's view of the Lord's Supper. And we've got more that we'll share with you on the flip side, so we'll see you there.